go into 6. So how many times does 3 divide into 6 evenly? Twice. So I'm going to place it right above the 2. So my first step is to always divide. Then what do I do with the 2 and the 3? I'm going to end up doing what? Multiplying. So I know 2 times 3 is 6. So after I multiply 3 times 2, which is 6, what's the next operation that I do?
3 times 9.
Well, now before I do that, what do I have to do, guys? Shh. What do I do with these 6's? I subtract. So then 6 minus 6 is 0. And then I bring down the next number, which is 9. And I repeat the process again. I ask myself, how many times does 3 divide into 9 evenly? 3 goes into 9 3 times. And then I multiply again. 3 times 3 is 9. And I subtract. So 9 minus 9 is 0. And then I bring down the very last value, which is 3. Oops, wrong spot. 3. And I repeat the process again. 3 goes into 3 one time. And I multiply again. 1 times 3 is 3. So then I subtract the 3, and then I end up with 0 as my remainder. So remember, the process is you start by dividing, then you multiply, you subtract, and you bring down. All right? So now let's take a look at one where you've got polynomials to divide. 6x to the third plus 9x squared plus 3x. I'm going to divide it by 3x. So 3x is going to go on the outside of my division sign. I'm going to place 6x to the third plus 9x squared plus 3x underneath my divisor. So now I start exactly the same process. I take 3x and I want to divide it into the very first term, which is 6x to the third. So if it helps you out, you can write this off to the side. What you're doing is you're taking 6x to the third and you're dividing it by 3x. Remind me again what happens when you divide variables. What do you do with those exponents? Subtract them. So what is 6x to the third divided by 3x going to give you? 2x squared. So I'm going to write that at the top. And then I'm going to multiply, just like I did in the last problem. 2x squared times 3x is a 6x to the third. And then I subtract. So the 6x to the third minus 6x to the third will cancel out. Bring down your next term, which is 9x squared. Repeat the process again. Take your 3x and you're going to divide it into 9x squared. So 9x squared divided by 3x, what is that going to give you when you divide that? That'll give you a what? That'll give you 3x. So 2x squared, remember to separate your terms by addition signs. This will be plus 3x. Now you take just the 3x and you're going to multiply again. 3x times 3x is a 9x squared. And I subtract. Bring down your very last term, which is 3x. And you repeat the process again. How many times does 3x divide into 3x evenly? Once. So then I'll multiply. 1 times 3x is 3x. And I subtract, so I have 0 remainder. So your answer is going to be 2x squared plus 3x plus 1. Okay? So any questions kind of ring a bell a little bit what you did last year when you're doing your long division. So remember, the process of long division. Your dad, your first step is you divide. To help you remember your steps. The next one is your mom. That's where you're going to multiply. Your sister, you're going to subtract. And then your brother, you're going to bring down. So remember, the process, the order of your steps is you divide, you multiply, you subtract, you bring down, and then you repeat the process again. All right? So let's take a look at x plus 7 and divide into x squared plus 9x plus 14. Remember, you always work with the very first term. Don't worry about the plus 7 when you divide. Always just work with the first term. So I'm going to take x and divide it into x squared. So again, if you want to write this off to the side to see what that's going to divide out to be, what is x squared divided by x? X squared divided by x is x. I always like to keep my like terms lined up, so I'm placing x over 9x. You don't have to. That's just the way I like to do it. So now, what's the next step after I divide? After I divide, what's the next step? Multiply. So you have to distribute the x, not only to the x, but to the 7 as well. So x times x is an x squared. X times 7 is a 7x. What's your next step after you multiply? So we divided, we multiplied, we subtract. Remember, you're going to subtract x squared, and you're subtracting the 7x. Distribute that subtraction sign all the way across. X squared minus x squared is going to cancel. 9x minus 7x is a 2x. And again, you can bring down your plus 14, or you can wait. Some people like to bring everything down at once. Some people just like to bring one thing down at a time. That's completely up to you. All right? So now I repeat the process again. You're constantly working with the first term on the outside. You're dividing it into the first term right here. So I have to take 2x and divide it by x. And what is 2x divided by x? What does that give you? 2. Remember, separate your terms by a plus sign on the top. So after I divide, what do I do again? I'm going to multiply. So 2 times x is a 2x. 2 times 7 is a 14. After I multiply, what's the last operation I'm going to do? I'm going to subtract. Make sure you distribute that subtraction sign all the way across. So what's my remainder going to be? My remainder is going to be 0. So my answer is just x plus 2. Yes?
Where did you get the 2?
When I took 2x, so right here, after I brought everything down, I have to repeat the process again.
Okay.
So I have to take the x and divide it into 2x, which is right here.
Take the x and move it to 5.
Divide it into the 2x. Okay? Any questions on that one? So let's take a look at number 4. Again, x minus 1, I'm dividing into x to the third minus x squared plus 2x minus 2. Again, always work with the first term when you start the division process. So I need to take x and divide it into x to the third. So what is x to the third divided by x going to give me? That's going to give me a what? X squared. So I'm going to write that above all my terms with x squared. After I divide, what's the next operation I need to do? After dividing, I'm going to multiply. So x squared times x is an x to the third. Remember, you have to distribute the x squared to all the terms on the outside. X squared minus 1 is a minus x squared. So I divided, I multiplied. What's the next step I'm going to have to do? Subtract. So I have to subtract. Remember, what happens here when I subtract a negative? That becomes a positive. So x to the third minus x to the third cancels. Negative x squared plus x squared cancels. So now after I multiply, that's where I'm going to bring down. So I'm going to bring down the 2x, and I like to bring everything down, and I'm going to bring down the minus 2. Repeat the process again after you bring down. So I'm going to take x. Remember, I always just work with the first two terms when I do the division part. So I have to take 2x and divide it by x. And what is 2x divided by x? 2. So again, separate those terms with addition signs. Repeat your process again. I'm going to multiply. 2 times x is 2x. 2 times negative 1 is a minus 2. After I multiply, what operation do I have to do? I have to subtract. So minus 2x, and then what happens with minus and negative 2? That becomes a plus 2. So remainder is 0. So I end up with x squared plus 2. Any questions on those two long division problems? All right, let's take a look at the next one. What's the issue with the polynomial that's underneath the division sign on this one? It's not in standard form. The big thing is, guys, you want to make sure that your polynomials are written in standard form. And when I say standard form, remember, you want those exponents for x to be in descending order, largest to smallest. Right now, the x squared is out of order. So my first step is going to be to rewrite this original problem as 2x to the third plus x squared minus 4x plus 2. So now I'm going to do the long division process, starting with the first term on the outside and the first term underneath the long division sign. So I'm going to take 2x to the third and divide it by x. What is 2x to the third divided by x? 2x squared. Again, I like to keep those like terms lined up. So after I divide, I'm going to do what? I'm going to multiply. 2x squared times x is a 2x to the third. 2x squared minus 1 is a minus 2x squared. So after I multiply, remember I need to do what? I need to subtract. Remember, distribute that subtraction sign. So I have a minus 2x to the third. What happens with this minus 2x squared? That's going to give me a positive. So x squared plus 2x squared is a 3x squared. So any questions on where I got the 3x squared from? Bring down the minus 4x. Bring down the plus 2. So now you're going to repeat the whole process again, starting with division. Again, when you're dividing, you're just working with the first terms. So I'm going to take x and divide it into 3x squared. So 3x squared divided by x will leave me with a what? 3x. So I have a plus 3x. Multiply. 3x times x is a 3x squared. 3x times negative 1 is a minus 3x. Again, after I multiply, I need to subtract. I have to subtract 3x squared minus 3x becomes a plus. So the 3x squares cancel. Minus 4x plus 3x is going to give me a minus x, and bring down that plus 2. So now repeat the process again. Take x, divide it into negative x. So when I take x and divide it into negative x, what is that going to produce? Negative 1. So my minus 1 goes at the top. Multiply again. Negative 1 times x is a negative x. Negative 1 times negative 1 is a positive 2. Excuse me, positive 1. I can multiply today. Negative 1 times negative 1 is a positive 1. And then I have to subtract. Minus a negative x is a positive. And then I have a minus 1. Well, what is 2 minus 1 going to be? 1. What is this 1, by the way? Remainder. So we do have a remainder. So any questions on how I did this long division? Now, when you have a remainder, remember how you have to write your final answer. You express it as a rational expression. So you have to express it as a fraction. So my answer is going to be these values that I got at the top. When I divided evenly, I got 2x squared plus 3x minus 1. Plus, take your remainder, which in this case is 1, place it over the divisor, which is the polynomial on the outside of the division side, which is x minus 1. So that would be your final answer. So when you have a remainder, you've got to write it as a fraction. Okay? So any questions on number 5? Kind of ringing a bell a little bit when we did long division last year? Now, when I see a problem like number 6, and I don't know, again, if your Algebra 2 teachers told you to do this or not, you must do this when it gets to the synthetic division. You've got to have a variable represented in descending order for each power. Notice I'm starting with an 8x to the third, and then I'm jumping down to no variable at all. So this is where you put those placeholders of 0. So I'm going to place a plus 0x squared plus 0x. Because you want to keep all your like terms lined up. So you want to make sure that if you start with an x to the third, you see an x to the squared, an x, and then a nothing at the end. That keeps everything lined up nice and neat for you when you're doing your long division. Synthetic division, you've got to put those zeros. So you start the process again. I'm going to take 2x and divide it into 8x to the third. So I take 8x to the third and divide it by 2x. What is 8x to the third divided by 2x? 4x squared. So I'm going to line that up right above where I put that 0x squared. I'm going to multiply. 4x squared times 2x is an 8x to the third. 4x squared times negative 1 gives me a minus 4x squared. That's why I like to have that 0x squared there, because the next operation is going to be to subtract. I have minus 8x to the third, minus a negative becomes a plus. So the 8x to the thirds cancel. 0x squared plus 4x squared will give me a 4x squared. Bring down your 0x, bring down your minus 1. Repeat your process again. Take 2x, divide it into 4x squared. So 4x squared divided by a 2x. What is 4x squared divided by 2x? 4x squared divided by 2x is a 2x. So 2x times 2x is 4x squared. 2x times negative 1 gives me a what? 2x times negative 1 is minus 2x. And then I'm going to subtract. I have a minus, and what happens with this minus and negative? It becomes a positive. Cancels. 0x plus 2x is 2x. Bring down your minus 1. Okay? So any questions where I got 2x minus 1 from? You guys go ahead and finish it for me. Of x plus or minus a number. So in other words, it can't be an x squared. It can't be an x to the third. You cannot have a coefficient in front of the x. So like I said, it has to be whatever's on the outside has to be in the form of 1x plus or minus a number in order to use synthetic division. Again, just like with the long division, always make sure your polynomials are written in standard form. Remember, you find the 0 of the divisor, that x plus or minus k. You have to set it to equal to 0 and solve for k. This is the value, remember when you set up your synthetic division box, this is what goes on the outside of your synthetic division box. All right, and then we'll walk you through the remaining steps. So let's take a look at number 7. So again, because your divisor is in the form of x plus or minus a number, you can use synthetic division. So the first thing you have to do is you have to find the 0 from the divisor. So if I take x minus 3 and set it equal to 0, what is the 0 going to be?
3.
X equals 3. So that's what goes on the outside. I always set up half of a rectangle. And that's the value that goes on the outside for synthetic division. Now remember, you must make sure that your polynomials are in standard form. Starting with the largest, the coefficient of the largest variable, we're going to start with the 6. Then we'll go to negative 19. What's the coefficient of x? The coefficient of x is a what? Positive 1, and then all the way down to 6. If you are missing, ladies and gentlemen, an x squared, suppose it just went from 6x to the third plus x, you would have to put a placeholder of 0 there if it was an x squared. You start synthetic division, you always bring down your very first coefficient that you wrote. So you always start by bringing it down. You multiply on the outside. So I'm going to multiply 3 times 6. And what is 3 times 6? That gives me a what? 18. So I bring that product up. I place it under the next coefficient. I add on the inside of the box. So what is negative 19 plus 18? Negative 19 plus 18 is a what? Negative 1. I repeat the multiplication again. I'm going to take 3, multiply it by negative 1. So what is 3 times negative 1? Negative 3. So again, I bring that up underneath the next coefficient and I add. 1 plus negative 3 is a negative 2. Repeat the multiplication on the outside again. 3 times negative 2 is a negative 6. And 6 plus negative 6 is a 0. And I always circle that very last number. What is that very last number? If you remember from last year, this is your remainder. So I have no remainder here. So any questions on the synthetic division process? This is not my final answer. But any questions on how I got up to this point? Now remember, what you have found right here are the coefficients, the numbers to go in front of the variables. So now remember, you started with an x to the third. Think about what happens with long division. You're taking an x to the third and dividing out an x. So the very first term is going to be an x to the what power? Not an x to the third, but an x to the second. So 6 is the coefficient of x squared. And then these are the coefficients going in descending order of the exponents. So 6x squared, after x squared comes an x to the first, so minus 1x, and then a minus 2, your constant. So that's your final answer. Kind of remember that a little bit?
Do I? Do you? Yes.
All right. So let's take a look at number 8. First of all, synthetic division allowed. Am I allowed to use synthetic division on this one?
Yes.
Yes, because it's a 1x plus or minus a number. So now I'm going to make my half of a rectangle. What number goes on the outside of this synthetic division? Negative 4. It's already in standard form, so the coefficient of x to the third is a 1. You have a 2, a negative 5, and a 12. So see if you can do that one for me. Did you guys come up with x to the squared minus 2x plus 3? Any questions, guys, on number 8? Remember, don't forget, you're adding on the inside, so 2 plus negative 4 is a negative 2. All right, any questions on that one? Now let's take a look at number 9.
Okay.
Are we allowed to use synthetic division?
Yeah.
Yes, because you're dividing by an x plus or minus a number. So here's my half rectangle. What number is going to go in the front of my rectangle here? 4. Now notice what you're going to place on top. You have x to the third minus 64. What variables exponents are you missing? You're missing a what? X squared and then x. So you've got to put placeholders of 0 where x to the second and x to the first would be for synthetic division to work. So I have my 1, which is the coefficient of x to the third. I have a 0x squared. I have a 0x and a minus 64. If you forget those zeros, synthetic division will not work. All right? So any questions on how I lined up the top of this one? Again, start by bringing down your 1. Multiply on the outside. 4 times 1 is 4. Add on the inside. 0 plus 4 is 4. Multiply 4 times 4, which is 16. Add them together. 0 plus 16 is 16. And then 4 times 16 is going to give me a 64, which gives me another remainder of 0. So that 1, 4, 16 are the coefficients. What's the exponent for the first variable? It's going to be an x to the what power? Is it x to the third or x to the second? X to the second. We always drop it down a degree. So x squared plus 4x plus 16. Okay? Questions on 9? You guys go ahead and try number 10 for me. Okay, now this one's different because what do we have in the end? We have a remainder. So remember, you write your remainder just like you do for long division. These are still the coefficients, so again, we're going to drop this down a degree. So that's going to give you a 2x squared. You don't have to write the 1 plus x plus 6. So to write your remainder, you take that remainder of 7, you place it over the divisor, which is your x minus 2. Okay? So any questions, guys? Shh. You guys were moaning and groaning about long division, synthetic division when we started, but any questions?
No, it's not like that.
All right, take out your homework, guys.